as we've kind of inferred already or talked in already, some of the usual ways that people have of moving are less available to them if they have Parkinson's disease. Now, to use kind of the map analogy that we're using here in the summit, it's like the usual path you take to get from one place to another is blocked off, maybe with construction or extra traffic, and so you need another route. And that, I think, is where the Feldenkrais method can be helpful to people with Parkinson's, because we teach new movement patterns that can substitute for some of the movements that may not be working quite so easily. And you might think about Google Maps suggesting an alternative route when one is not so available. So let's try this out a little bit. I think of myself, I think of Feldenkrais teachers as movement detectives. So I invite you to do a little movement process with me, and throughout we'll do some movement and we'll kind of illustrate some of the principles of the Feldenkrais method. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, I'd love it. It'd be good.
Okay, good. All right, so Cynthia, you're going to do the movement, so folks will have a chance to not only participate, but also if they need a reference point, they'll have it. So I invite you, first of all, sit and have your feet flat on the floor. Notice, can you have your knees a little bit apart so that they're maybe about shoulder width or hip width apart. So you have a good base of support, and this is important in Parkinson's disease, where we tend to kind of, get inward a little bit on ourselves. And could you begin by simply lifting one of your arms up in the air toward the ceiling? Just go as far as is comfortable, what's easy for you, and come back down again. So do that a couple of times, and I would be watching or looking for things like, is your shoulder blade moving? Do your ribs, do your spine adjust at all, their position? Are they involved in movement at all as the hand is coming up? Do you shift your weight as you're sitting there? Okay, pause, rest for a moment. Our classes are called Awareness Through Movement. In order to improve movement, in order to learn new movements, we have to pay attention. See, this is getting back to some of that conscious piece. So we ask our students questions about the sensations that they experience in doing particular movements. So let's try it again. Lift your arm up in the air toward the ceiling and go slowly, Bring it down. You're going to do this a few times. And notice, where does it get maybe a little more difficult, a little sticky? Maybe you're tempted to tell yourself, oh, I should work a little harder here. I should push a little. Don't do that. Not necessary. The next time you raise your arm up, notice, do you inhale as you raise your arm? Do you exhale? I'm not talking about a right and a wrong way. Simply notice what you do. Maybe you hold your breath, and that's probably the least good option. So the next time you bring your arm down, let it just stay there and rest for a moment. Now, in our lessons, we ask people to step outside their usual movement pattern, to engage in something that might be a little different, to do the movement differently. Now, this is key, I think, for people with Parkinson's. When we move with conscious attention, we use a different part of our brain, and that part may be less affected by Parkinson's disease. Let me tell you about my friend John Pepper. I already mentioned this book by Dr. Norman Doidge, The Brain's Way of Healing. And you may be familiar with John because there's a whole chapter about John Pepper and his approach of what he calls conscious walking, really paying attention to all the components of walking. And he walks quickly. Well, another thing about John is that he, like some people with Parkinson's disease, has a tremor. And when John just reaches straight forward for the glass, just like we all do, we reach for the glass right out here, we bring it to our mouth, he's likely to lose a little of the beverage on the way. So here's the glass. What John has developed that works for him, and of course each person has to kind of discover this for themselves, he comes around, takes his hand behind the glass, holds it in a very unusual, unfamiliar, conscious way. And that enables him to drink without losing the water. So that's an example of using your conscious brain to work around some of those movements that aren't so accessible. In our going slow and paying attention, we want to notice small differences. So let's try something again. As you lift your hand this time, look at your hand going up toward the ceiling. Just watch your hand, notice your eyes can follow that movement along and follow it along, coming back down again. And notice that may change a little bit the way you move. Maybe you notice that a little more of your spine or your shoulder might be involved. And then pause, let your hand rest. Here's the other exciting thing. When we move slowly and with attention, we are supporting the brain's way of changing and learning. Michael Merzenich, the noted neuroscientist, actually, he's the one that did a lot of the earliest research on neuroplasticity, the ability of our brain, even throughout our life, to change and to grow. Michael Merzenich says, Dr. Merzenich says that these kinds of improvements and changes, learning, happens most easily and lasts longer when we pay attention while learning. And our work is all about learning. Now, this is also a little challenging, I think, for people with Parkinson's because perception gets affected. So we're going to use the hand that has not been going up in the air as a bit of a feedback. Take that free hand and bring it over to your ribs on the side underneath the arm that's been lifting up. Just rest it there. And I ask you to just listen, feel with that hand. Remember, we're paying attention to sensation. So this time, as you bring your arm up in the air toward the ceiling, notice, what do you feel with that second hand? Do your ribs move a little bit? You know, ribs are a little like fingers. They can go further apart and get closer together. So notice first whether your ribs do any kind of movement. And now, this time, help with that second hand. Encourage a little bit of supporting, a little bit of lifting, a little bit of opening of your ribs with that hand. Yeah, and you might find that you begin to do a little turning or you begin to shift your weight. Notice if your ribs can help you take your hand up as well as bring your arm back down. It works both ways. And then the next time you lift your hand, now we're going to use that hand on the ribs to basically hold your ribs steady. Don't let there be any movement there. And just begin very slow, just a little, don't force it. Notice, ooh, now that kind of limits it, doesn't it? And for some folks, that may feel like a really familiar movement. And that may indicate that, that's a part of this movement sequence that isn't so clear for you. And so that would be something we could explore a little bit further. Since our sensory and our motor systems are linked in the brain. So when we're paying attention, as we were there, to the sensation of a movement that's linked to a movement that we're doing, it's like we complete the feedback loop. When we pay attention and move slowly, brain chemicals are available in that connection between the neurons that are not there if we're going quickly and not particularly paying attention. These neurotransmitters, in addition to dopamine, strengthen those connections. They facilitate that communication. And in a sense, we're developing a new route. The more we use with attention that movement, the more established that movement option becomes. So what was maybe starting as a footpath, to use the map idea again, can become a sidewalk, can become a street, can become a highway, and can become available for you in the future.